funnily enough, Tony's talk actually kind of connects into this one, and that's interesting because we totally didn't coordinate anything. So he's talking about the idea of a great package system. He's talking about the technology known as Kubernetes, which is a cluster orchestration system. Both of those things are technologies I've been using with Meteor recently. Actually gave a talk about both of them at Google in the past 2 weeks. So that's kind of interesting. I'm not going to get around to either of them in this talk. This is an introduction to Meteor. But I think it's interesting that you can come to a meetup like this and kind of get this random overlap. So that's kind of neat. So this is going to be about Meteor. And the way I usually do this talk is I don't like to just get like a lecture, usually myself, when I hear about something new. So I like to see some code, right? And the best way to see some code is when it's actually real live code, which is also dangerous as a speaker because often things go wrong. So you'll have to kind of bear with me on that. But I tried to design the talk that I would want to see when I'm given a Meteor introduction. So to start it off, I just wanted to say hello from the future. I'm saying this because coming from Meteor, coming from 2 years of experience with Meteor, I feel like I have to go back and remember what it was like before. There are a few technologies where that happens, right? Where when Ajax launched 10 years ago, or when things like Hadoop and Redis came out, and it kind of really fundamentally realigned how you kind of work with software. I have to go back into the past and remember, okay, I'm telling a story now about this world where things are drastically simpler than they used to be. And I get to work with that stuff every day, but many of you might not have discovered that. So this is my attempt of kind of communicating that feeling, and hopefully I'll be able to communicate that throughout the talk as well. So who am I? So my name's Rahul. I come from the Netherlands. I've actually only been here for about 3 months now, and I work for a tech consultancy called Q42. We're based in Amsterdam and The Hague, and there's 60 engineers working there at this point. And I'm here to start the US version of our company. So I'm here by myself. And it's been lots of fun. I've been going around and speaking and talking about this stuff. So we do all kinds of different software development, but we dived into Meteor in 2012 because we like kind of living on the edge and doing dangerous things that aren't a good idea. So we experiment with new unproven technologies like Meteor. But now 2 years in, I feel like we made the right decision because it's become stable and it's something you can actually run production software on. So before I get started, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to kind of have some questions for you guys to give me a sense of what we're dealing with. And I'm going to give you a background on Meteor so that hopefully, me having come from the future, I can kind of give you some kind of context for what Meteor is, the way I remember it when I started using it. All right? So the first question is, has anybody in this room used Meteor? All right, we've got 3, 4, 5, 6 people. And how many people are in the room? Maybe like 50, 60 people? So that's not very much. The funny thing is that in the Netherlands, where I was based for a few years, I was kind of upset that nobody was using Meteor. And I thought, maybe if I move to Silicon Valley, that problem will be fixed. And I'm actually seeing lower numbers, which is interesting. Of course, that's not your fault. That's Meteor's fault, right? So we need to work on that. But it's kind of interesting to see. So let's give you a bit of an introduction to what Meteor is, since most of you haven't used it yet. First of all, I just want to make clear that Node.js is largely backed by a company, right? And that gives it a huge edge over a lot of open source projects. Meteor is kind of the same thing. It was originally started as a startup, and the pitch of the startup was, we want to take some of the technology that companies like Google and Facebook have that gives them an edge, right? That gives them real-time applications, that allows them to build these great experiences based on all of the experience and all of the engineering that they've had. We want to take that, and we want to make that open source and give it to everybody. That is the pitch. And the Meteor platform is the thing they designed to address that problem, right? So they got venture capital, they got a staff, they have an office in San Francisco, and this is something they've been building for about 3.5 years now. The reason I'm saying this is because, well, first of all, there's a bit of an overlap in Node.js, but also because, for me, that gave it a little bit of credence over just being some random open source project done by somebody in their spare time that might, vanish tomorrow, right? So that, for me, that was like influential. So the site lives at meteor.com. You can go ahead and take a look at it. We'll be doing some coding in a little bit. So I already kind of went through this. Why make Meteor? The idea is to bring this technology to everybody. So where are we now, right? Coming back from my future where I fly around on unicorns, I think it's important to kind of illustrate what it's like to build web applications today, and then you can get a sense of like what is Meteor really trying to tackle. So I made a little picture. I don't think it's a very good one, but it might help. This is these are these three realms of technology that we tend to deal with, right? We've got client technology, server technology, and database technology. Now I'm oversimplifying, but that's generally where most of us spend our time in one of these three, what I like to call pillars. So then down at the bottom here, we've got some ideas of examples of technologies that we see in these different pillars. So most of the time, we're used to viewing them as these isolated environments, right? You're either a front-end engineer or a back-end engineer. You spend time with databases. And maybe you hop between them a little bit, but it's not something you really do a lot because the technologies themselves actually create this division. So the starting point for Meteor, where they started thinking about it, is at these bottom three, right? Because you can see that they're actually the same technology, really, underneath everything. So they identified that, and they said, what if we made a platform that does this, that says there's one API that you talk to, and you actually are controlling these three different layers at the same time? That's a very different way of thinking about how you build these web applications, right? So let's get into some of the principles behind Meteor. I also like to call them buzzwords because some of them sound ridiculous. So everybody's into reactive programming these days. So is Meteor. Why reactive programming? Because it's a really great paradigm for designing user interfaces. What is this one language thing about? Well, the idea behind the one language thing is that if you only have to learn one language to build the entire app, that's way simpler than if you had to learn 3 different languages or more, right? And you kind of underestimate that. You kind of think, well, what's the big deal? I mean, I know SQL, right? I can do some PHP. But it actually turns out that just using one language is, in your brain, just easier. You don't have to constantly switch between these different modes. And then it's also really simple for new people coming into engineering, right? They don't have to learn all this different stuff. They just learn JavaScript. They can build apps. Then there's this idea of hot deploys, which is also something that's becoming kind of hip these days. A hot deploy means that I release a new version of my application, but I don't interrupt the user. So normally, to do that, you have to build a bunch of stuff. It comes for free with Meteor platform. So another one is this idea of latency compensation, which means that I think React is actually doing this now as well, which means that when I make a change, I instantly see the change in my user interface, even though I actually have to send a message to the server first. The platform includes the capability to do that. Kind of connecting back to what Tony was saying, Meteor has this idea of an ISO package where the package contains not just the code, but it can also include the database and the view layer and the HTML and the CSS, which they call an ISO package, and allows you to really kind of like create these component-based applications. And live updates, of course, is a thing that we've all been used to for a little while now. So on top of all of these lives this idea called simplicity, that if you pursue simplicity through your API, if you make sure that this platform is very easy to use, then, like I said, you open it up to a lot of new people, but you also make sure that it's just much easier to build great apps because you're not distracted by the platform. So the idea of Meteor is it's so simple that it's almost abstracted away, so you can focus on building your app, right? So it even starts with the way you install Meteor. Normally, when you go to a new framework or platform and you go to their website, it says, all right, start by installing Brew, and then installing NPM, and then going and installing all of these different versions of things, and you need MongoDB and all this other stuff. Meteor says, just run this command, and we'll install everything for you. It'll take you 2 minutes, and after that, you can just start making Meteor apps. I think that's really cool because instead of me having to first grok all of his documentation and scroll through and figure out how to go to all his websites, install Java, all this stuff. I get started immediately. It installs this stuff, and basically the Meteor stack ends up being comprised of roughly these elements. There's a lot more in there, but just for the sake of this talk, let's keep it simple. Let's talk about the fact that since you've got a client and a server and a database, you need these 3 layers, right? So if you imagine in your head the way that the client view usually works, right? We're talking about things like Backbone.js, AngularJS, to some extent React, right? Meteor has its own virtual DOM engine called Blaze. It does pretty much the same thing as all of these others, except it's really, really simple to use. You have this database that comes shipped with the platform. Every time you make a new app, you get a new database. You can make new documents inside the database. And importantly, what they do is they handle the mirroring of the server-side database and the client-side database for you. You don't have to think about that. Normally, in a view environment, you build the view, and then you get data from the server. But you don't know how, because first you have to build the server side, right? So if you're a client-side engineer, you can't actually ship your product because you need a server-side engineer. And then there's this idea of DDP, which is a protocol they came up with, which basically sends JSON over WebSockets, right? So that's the stack. Anyway, so the reason you came here, I'm hoping, is to see a demo, so let's jump into that. Let's see how much time I still have. I've still got like half an hour, right? OK, we should be good. So I'm just going to switch out and figure out how to get my screen working. I think this should be OK. It's a little hard, considering I'm not facing this direction. OK, so here's this Meteor app that I made that I use at demos, right? All it does is it's a list of the people at this meetup. And you can sort the table. There's a list of how many people there are. And you can sign in with Twitter or some other account, right? The idea is that if you sign in, you can upvote these people. And if you're not signed in, you can't, right? So we'll see how far I get, because I only have half an hour, and I usually take 90 minutes for this talk. But let's try and build this app from scratch, OK? So we're going to open up the command line. Let's see. All right, we've got the command line. This is actually showing you the current app running. And we're going to open up Atom, which I'm using to create stuff right now. And so I have 2 different windows here. This is the code of the current app, which I'm going to minimize, because we don't need that right now. And I just use that in case I mess up, and I can just copy-paste the code. And then we're going to create a new app that we're going to kind of build from scratch, right? So open up, kind of quit this, and we can clear, and then we cd out. And so the way that you make an app with Meteor is you don't need to install Grunt or do any of that stuff. You just use the Meteor command line, right? So it's doing a bunch of stuff, and it's done. We can cd into it, and we can just run Meteor. It's starting itself up. Even starts at MongoDB for you. And now we have an app running at localhost 3000. So I can just switch into the browser, and I can go to localhost 3000. And it gives you this, right? Welcome to Meteor with a button. Let's see where my mouse is. There we go. And when you click this button, the number changes, right? So we're getting a little sense of, to some extent, reactive templating. We've got some live data changing. Important to note about this is a lot of times you'll see these front-end templating environments that basically give you this demo, and they're demonstrating two-way data binding. But the important difference here is this is changing data in the database. So that's actually pretty significant. So I'll show you some stuff in the code we're going to build that gives you an idea of why that's really useful. Let's switch out to the code. And let's open up the folder that this created. So we've got this folder right here. And you'll see that there are 3 files. Can everybody see this OK? Is it too dark? Yes. Everybody's OK? Yeah? Does it need to be, probably need to increase the font size? It's really hard for me to see from here. So you get 3 files, and you get this .meteor folder. The .meteor folder we don't need to worry about right now. I'll close that. So the HTML file we're going to empty out. And I'll slowly fill you in about that. And the JS file, because it's just the default, right? We don't want the default. We want to build something new. Immediately, you'll see that I saved. and the page refreshes, there's nothing there. So built into Meteor is watching all of your files and automatically refreshing when you change them, which I think is pretty neat because normally I have to go and set that up. I don't have to, it just works, right? And a lot of that simple approach to taking care of things like that for you is kind of underlying the way that Meteor goes about things. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build up our HTML model. So Meteor actually handles your entire page for you. You don't write the HTML like as static HTML. You write it in what they call their templating environment. So there's a couple of things we can control. We can control the head.
Can't see it.
You can't see it? It's too small?
Yeah, yes.
Let's make it bigger. Is this big enough? Sorry? Flux? What? Oh, do we need to turn off the light? Would that help?
No, are you using Flux on your laptop?
Oh, I see. You mean, right. I thought you meant React Flux. I'm like...
You can read it now.
Yeah,
You
no.
can see it.
That's a good point, actually, yeah. All right. So we've got this head, right? And you just put like, this is like the head that you get in your HTML document. So we can put demo here. This is actually really hard to type like this. Maybe I should just do a mirroring of my, let's do that. Just one quick second. And I'll just drag that over to my window so I can see what I'm doing. All right, displays, mirror displays. Okay, that's a lot easier. Okay, so we've got the body, and inside the body, we're just going to say, I want to render my template out. And the way we do that is with handlebars, or handlebars style syntax, very simple. And then we can say, actually, I can't call it body, call it main, I guess. Template name is main, right? And then in here, we can just put our code, right? Let's save this and see what happens. So we save it, and then in the background, this shows up, right? And in the console, we're seeing that it noticed that something changed and it can refresh. And then in the source code, we're seeing this. So the first time I saw this, I was like, yikes, what the hell is this? Well, what you're seeing here is the entire Meteor platform being sent to the client for you, including your own code. So all of this stuff is things like underscore, Meteor, various logging things, reloading stuff, etc., mini-mongo. And then down here, we've got my JavaScript. And the reason that this works the way it does is because they need to interpret all of your HTML and convert it to JavaScript, because then they can continue to rerun it in their virtual DOM engine. And the reason that they're sending all of this stuff to the client is because all of the magic that Meteor does for you needs to run in JavaScript, so it needs to take care of that. I don't have to worry about this. This just happens. I didn't configure any of this. But that is the reason that the page looks different, right? Everything gets sent to the client, everything gets interpreted, and everything gets run. And so I end up seeing something that was parsed by the browser, but it's not sent there as static HTML. Do you have a question?
Just out of curiosity, can you open this demo.js file? Just click on the last one.
So you can see this isn't very interesting to look at because there's no code. I didn't write anything yet. But I can open this again in a few minutes once we have some more. And you'll see what it's doing, how it's parsing that. Just wanted to give you a sense of what's going on there. So let's write some more code. So we have a list, right? And we have a table. So this is one of those moments where I just quickly grab some HTML from this other thing and get rid of that. And then I just need to prevent it from breaking because it can't have references to things that don't exist. Okay, so we have a table, just regular table, with a header, and each of those has, let's say, +1s. They need to be THs. And what was it? The name and the date. And then here's how we list a bunch of people, right? But on each, we give it a name, and then inside it we put a table row, and then we're going to have 3 columns, right? Everybody with me so far? Okay. So how do we represent all of this in code? How do we attach data? How do we even declare that there is data and that we want there to be, people in this list? So we go to the JavaScript, and let's just remember that there's this one API, and they have this idea called isomorphism, which is kind of a reappropriation of an existing computer science term. But the way that they're using it means that across the client and the server, there is one API, and it's the same. So you can write the code the same way in the client or the server, and it works. So the best example of that, actually, is us declaring that there is a database containing data. And the way we do that is we say, people is new Mongo collection, and we give it a name. So if we save this, and don't get an error, hopefully, right? So now we see this code that I put there, and we can scroll down and we can take a look at that. Template.demoapp.js, right? Now you can see that it's interpreted all of the HTML and converted it, and that allows it to rerun it efficiently when necessary. So if we open up the Chrome inspector, and we make this a little larger, then we can now write people, and we can see that we've now got a Mongo collection on the client. The way this works is that Meteor implemented MongoDB on the client, basically, and they call that mini Mongo. And then underwater, they will look at what exists in the server-side database, and they will send it to the client based on your filtering preferences or whatever. But the result is that independently from me working on the server or the client, I'm just speaking Mongo. I don't have to think about taking data out of the document object model and then sending it in an AJAX callback to the server and then receiving it and transforming it in SQL in some other language, right? It's just me changing data directly on the database. So I can even say this. People insert a document with a name equal to my name. And it inserted it. And it gives me the ID. But since we're not printing anything on the page, I didn't see anything happen, right? So let's go and change that. Let's say, remember here, it says each people, right? So let's say only on the client does templating exist for now. So let's say if Meteor client is running, if we're in client-side code, in the main template, let's define people, right? That was what it was, as the result of the following query. All people in the database. So save this. Main.people.
You didn't set up a TR.
I didn't what? You're right, I didn't print anything. There we go. So we can say this, and then we can say name right here. Whoops. Right, save it, and it should refresh. We should get something. All right, so here's the name. Can everybody see that okay? It doesn't need to be bigger. So we've got a table, we've got some data, right? So we can see that there's data coming from the server, it's being sent to the client, and it's being put in the template. And all I had to do was declaratively, say that the data should be there. I didn't have to do any sending of data back and forth. But the really cool thing is that now, again, if I insert someone else into the database, watch what happens. Right? So the whole round trip is happening without me having to write any glue code. I just declare in the client that there is data in the database. It puts it in the template, and it sends it to the database on the server. So what you end up being able to see is not just the fact that that one page can show this data, but if I can resize this window, right? So now we've got two different windows. If I now insert data again, you see it show up in both windows, right? And that's actually, so now I'm starting to realize how much time this is saving me. Because the data is going from the client to the server, and then it's being sent down to all the other clients that are connected. So everybody visiting your website, as data changes, just sees it change without you having to do anything. It just works, right? So let me see. I don't think we're going to have time to get very far into the demo because I really don't have that much time. So what I want to do is I want to show you two things. And the reason I want to show you these two things is because I think they have maximum impact in communicating the value of Meteor 2. The first is the package system, and the second is going to be OAuth. So let's dive into the package system. How does a package system usually work? Usually you have a command line like npm, you say I want to install some code, and you have like a JSON file that you need to configure or something like that. So the way Meteor works, and I referred to it earlier when I said ISO packages. The way Meteor, sorry, yeah?
So going any further, I think people would wonder if it's really secure entering database.
These are your, so
how security works?
Security works, and I'm not going to show that right now because I don't have time to go into a lot of depth, but we can definitely talk about it afterwards. I'd love to demo it for you. So a lot of you and myself, when I first saw this, immediately had a lot of questions about like, how does security work? How does scaling work, right? Okay, I don't have time to go into those topics today. You should definitely talk to me afterwards. What I want to do is I want to get you to the point where you feel comfortable and understand the advantages of Meteor, and then you can dive in, and then we can talk afterwards. So even though you're going to have a couple of questions, you're going to be wondering, what do I do with all the JavaScript sent to the client, all this other stuff. There are answers for these things, but unfortunately I can't go into them because then I'd spend a lot of time Q&A and not with the demo. And personally I think it's very valuable to show you these two other things. Is that okay? All right. So this ISO package system, right? And a package in Meteor can actually contain a whole bunch of stuff, but it can also just contain a bunch of JavaScript. So in the case of me having a date on my username, on my record that represents me, I can say, let's insert another person. This time let's give them a date, right? New date, like this. And then when I go to the HTML and I say print that date, then I have the problem where it's not formatted very well, right? It's just the date printed. So in Node.js you have, or in NPM you have this package called moment.js, and that actually is a very convenient way of formatting dates. So let's try adding that. So there would be two ways that normally you would add this with the Node Package Manager, but Meteor actually connects to the Node Package Manager and allows you to kind of pull those things in. So you can say Meteor add MRT moment.js, or I think it's moment.js. No such package. Maybe it's moment.js moment. I always forget. Right. And so now it's added moment.js for us, and the page refreshes again because it sees that some code has changed. I didn't have to go around and search for that. You can use the command line to find packages by searching for them. I happen to know that this one exists. And so now it's available in my project. And so if I want to format that date, I can just go here, and I can override that date string that I put there, and I can say, rather than just returning the blank date, let's return moment from now on that date, and go back, and get an error because I made a mistake, right? Because date doesn't exist. This .date, by the way. And then now you get this nice relative date, right? So that's very simple. You can use a packet, you can add packages, you can use them very simply. You don't have to worry about getting the JavaScript loaded, right? The JavaScript for moment.js is in my page. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to conceptually add that package. So the next thing I want to show you is this other thing that before Meteor, back in the past when I used to build apps with Java, really gave me a headache, OAuth, right? So this thing we do as a company, we do prototyping a lot with clients, and a lot of the times when you do a prototype, you want to spend as little time as possible on making something that's really valuable, but you still want to have some kind of way for users to use the system, right? So every time you start from scratch and you start thinking, well, in this prototype, I want to be able to have users log in, right? And you think, it would be really nice if I could allow them to log in with Google and Twitter, but you can't do that because the implementation of OAuth would take more time than the week you have to do your prototype. And I always felt bad about this, and I never enjoyed building OAuth. I think nobody in this room probably actually enjoys implementing OAuth login. So thankfully, one really great example of an ISO package and something that I think really demonstrates the value of Meteor is the way that they've implemented their account system. So we can just go back to the command line and we can say, I want to add an account system and I want to add specifically Google login. So what, oh yeah, I'm offline, that's interesting. It actually works. So now what it said is, okay, I found accounts Google, apparently in my offline registry, because I'm not connected to the internet, and I found a couple of dependencies that it depends on, and I've added them to your project for you. Okay? So now I could technically, through code, log in with Google if I knew what the API was. I don't want to do that though. I want to add a user interface for this. Account UI. So let's add that. So how does this work? Well, Accounts UI actually comes with a small template called login buttons, which it exposes to you, and you can just add yourself. Save that, and it gives me this button. So if you remember that an ISO package is a combination of server-side JavaScript, client-side JavaScript, but also HTML and CSS, and then also its own database, you realize how this can be really valuable. So I have a button now that says Configure Google Login, and it just pops up this pop-up and tells me what to do. It says, go to this page, create a project, fill in this form, and then copy this data over. And thankfully, I opened this tab because I can never find it. And I have this data right here. I have a client ID. Please don't copy it. Right? And I have a client secret. Don't copy that either. I'm just following the steps in this form, and you can see this button just lit up, so pay attention. Now I can sign in with Google. But I can't connect to the internet. So unfortunately, I can't demo the full round trip. So what's really powerful about this is that, again, now I can focus on building things, and I don't have to worry about auth. And more importantly, I didn't even have to do any of the communication between my server and their server, the client and my server. All I have to worry about is where do I put my login button, and eventually, how do I want it to look? Because you can just override that. I think this is really, really powerful, and I think that one of the fundamental paradigms or principles of Meteor that I mentioned in the beginning, simplicity, is really reflected in the fact that I can take this so easily and give myself full login features, right? So what happens when you log in? Well, unfortunately, since I can't demo that because I'm not connected to the internet, I'll just describe it. It gives you a collection in Mongo called meteor.users, and you can just do stuff with that, just like I just showed you with the people database. So you can put properties on users and show them in the user interface. You can list all the users in your app, or you can just log in once. I could log into that window, and this one would log in at the same time because we are the same user. But if I opened an incognito window and had a normal window next to it, and I logged in on the left window, the right window wouldn't log in. So there's a lot of that stuff. Yeah?
Would you like me to log you in?
No, it's cool. We'll get through it. So this is I think this is really, really interesting. And it's really made it possible for me to build a new category of apps just because now I spend all of my resources on adding value for the customer or for whoever it is that I'm building for, instead of wasting all of that money implementing all of this glue. So I wish I could show you more of the demo, but unfortunately, I think we only have a few more minutes. So I'm going to show you the rest of the talk, and hopefully you'll be able to go and look at the code for this on GitHub and get a sense of what it should really work like. So let's do that. So I'm going to unmirror my displays real quick. Right here. And then go back to my talk. It should work okay. I don't know what's going on here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that was the demo. So now that you've seen like a very, very quick introduction to how Meteor can work and what it can do for you, what else is there? And this is kind of like where we would go if we had some questions, right? So the first thing is that, and I didn't really get to show you this, when I declared that people database, the whole database is getting pushed to the client. So if there's 200 users, then you have 200 users on the client. Obviously, you don't want this, right? That doesn't make any sense, pushing the whole database to the client. There's bandwidth considerations, privacy considerations. It just doesn't make much sense. You don't usually need that data. So there's actually a very rich publication subscription model that is very easy to use that allows you to say, I just want to publish this subset, for instance, the current page, right? So then you write a query that says, give me all documents limited 0 to 10. And then on the client, you can subscribe and say, I want to subscribe to that publication, which will give me 10 documents, but I want to give it a parameter, such as page 1 or page 2. And then as you change the parameters, the data changes, and Meteor makes sure that your templates update. So I just have to, when I go to page 2, say, now I'm looking at page 2, and the whole round trip executes again, which again dramatically reduces the amount of code that normally I would be writing. In the area of security, this is a very simple way of approaching security. You basically declare exactly, like on the database, what is allowed to happen when something changes. So if I run an insert query, the allow deny setup will give you the document that is being inserted, the ID of the user who is inserting it, and say, make a decision. So I could say, hey, you're not authorized to make this insertion, or you're inserting data that isn't allowed to be in the database. That happens with update, that happens with remove. So any query you do on MongoDB, you can actually have it pass through this one last filter that prevents you from making any security errors. And it's very, very simple to use, and it's very powerful. And I actually really like the way it models security, because instead of me now having my security at the controller level, right, the first time that data comes from the client, in all of these different controllers, I have it in one place, and I can model it the way that I need to, but it's right there at the database level. So this is a thing that I so wish I could demo that, but it would take me so much time. It actually includes support for building your app for iOS and Android. And again, from the point of view of simplicity, they said, when you normally build for Android or iOS, what do you have to do? You have to install the SDK. It takes forever. You have to install some kind of editor like Android Studio. It takes forever. You probably get an error at some point. I don't want to waste my time on that. This is something we can automate. So you just run install SDK Android, and you wait like 2 or 3 minutes because it needs to download like a gigabyte of stuff. And then you add platform Android to your app. And then you say run Android, and the thing that will happen is when you run that command, the Android simulator will open up, and you'll see your app running in the Android simulator, which is actually kind of amazing when you see it, because you're just not used to things being made so easy, right? You can even change code and then see it refresh in the Android simulator. That's how much they've hooked up. So I definitely recommend trying this out. It's very impressive. So the package system that I showed you, you can access it through the command line, but there's also a website called Atmosphere.js. I recommend checking that out. You'll see that there are several thousand packages. It's a very healthy environment. And the most interesting packages are the ones that are looking beyond, taking a JavaScript library and putting it in the package system, but they're really looking at, okay, now that I have this ISO package environment, what can I do? How can I take components of applications? How can I take entire round trips like an encount system and package that for you so you don't have to build it yourself? Someone's working on a really kick-ass reactive end-to-end test suite called Velocity. I was at the big Meteor meetup last week in San Francisco. They demoed it, and they've built a system that allows you to parallelize your tests in the cloud and get full end-to-end test suites coverage in maybe 2 to 3 seconds. You should definitely check this out. This is just like a completely different way to do testing, and it just looks so great because, again, thanks to this full stack being one part of this one platform, you can change the way that you build test suites. You can test your entire stack in isolation. You can take the database, the server, and the client for this one piece of modular code, and you can test that by itself, and there's no overlap. So it's really a kind of like an idealized environment for this kind of thing. So here's a couple of things that I think you should check out if you're interested in finding out more. The top link is really it's a to-do list app example that you can kind of follow step by step. If you really want to get started at the base level, I recommend doing that. The documentation, again, very, very simple. One big page. That's all they needed. That's all there is to the documentation. And then if you want to kind of take the next steps, I recommend buying Discover Meteor, which is really the book that that gives you like a really great overview of what can you do with Meteor, what's available for it, how do you build something that's robust and can go up to production. And they basically build like this app called Telescope, which is a reactive version of Hacker News. And they show you how it's very easy using the expressiveness of Meteor to create these interesting applications. Bulletproof Meteor goes into scalability, high performance, dealing with load, how do you scale MongoDB, that kind of stuff. And then, as I said, Atmosphere.js. So if you want to see this talk, I have the slides and the code base that I was kind of working on up on GitHub. You need to check out the MTV.js branch. That's the one that's most recently updated. And so that was my talk. I hope I managed to finish on time. Yes? Yes?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, yes, yes.
Scalability question. Very cool.